Hey everyone, welcome to the Zeitgeist on A Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Jane Roper. Here on the Zeitgeist, we talk with authors whose books touch on hot button issues like race, class, gender, culture, health, and whatever else I feel like talking about. We broadcast the first and third Thursdays of the month. And if you want to get up to date on what's going to be on the Zeitgeist and all of our other awesome shows on A Mighty Blaze, please like us on Facebook, Twitter, and or Instagram, or sign up for our newsletter at amightyblaze.com. My guest today is Jasmine Chan, author of the searing hot debut novel, The School for Good Mothers. Jasmine's stories have appeared in Tin House and Epic. She's a former reviews editor at Publishers Weekly. She holds an MFA from Columbia University and a BA from Brown. Her work has received support from the Elizabeth George Foundation, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, Wurlitzer Foundation, the Kimmel Harding Nelson Center, the Anderson Center, VCCA, which I love. I love VCCA. I've been there a bunch of times, and Ragdale. She lives in Chicago with her husband and daughter. The School for Good Mothers takes readers into the life of Frida Liu, a divorced, overworked, exhausted single mom who leaves her toddler daughter at home unattended for a couple of hours. And due to this lapse in judgment, she ends up in a government reform program for bad mothers and faces the possibility of losing custody of her daughter, Harriet, indefinitely. Library Journal, in a starred review, says Chan's stunning debut could not be timelier, leaving no stone unturned in its allusion to real-life legal assaults constraining women today. Part dystopian, part prescient, impossible to put down, and impossible to forget, which is absolutely true. Welcome, Jasmine. It's so nice to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Jane. Thanks for having me on the show.
And we talked backstage about your name, and it really is Jasmine. And I was worried about the pronunciation, but it's
a ridiculous game I've been playing since I was a small child, in which I've been telling people to say it's Jasmine, even though it's clearly spelled like Jessamine, because my parents chose the more original spelling when they intended to name me after the flowers. So I just tell everyone, don't go by baby name books. Give your kids simple names. Don't get too creative. I mean, right. they meant well, but it's a good icebreaker.
It is, right? Yeah, and it looks pretty and it sounds pretty in two different ways. I'm just glad my parents didn't stick a Y in my name. They gave me the straight up Jane. So anyway, your book, it was so powerful. I really tore through it. I found myself feeling slightly horrified the whole time, which is part of the effect. But can you tell, I gave the sort of setup of the book. I've heard you say elsewhere that part of what inspired this book for you was some of your own feelings about becoming a mom. Can you tell us a little more about the genesis of the book and where it began for you?
Well, the elevator pitch I like to give for the book is that it's a little like 1984, but for moms.
Right.
And the genesis of the book, it began in early 2014. So it's like I'm telling you about 80 years ago in pandemic time. So I started the book way before getting pregnant and before having a baby myself. And the genesis of the book partly came from my intense anxiety and ambivalence and feeling like under so much pressure time-wise to make a decision about whether or not to have a baby. So I was heading into my late 30s and it was time to choose a path.
Yeah.
And so the time pressure felt very real and I didn't feel ready. And I was thinking a lot about motherhood and feeling very conflicted. And a few months before I ended up starting the project, I read a piece in the New Yorker called Where Is Your Mother by Rachel Aviv, which is about a nonfiction account of a single mom who leaves her toddler son at home for a stretch of time. And then after that day, never gets him back. Wow. So something about that story just really stayed with me. I didn't sit down with a plan saying, oh, this will spark this dystopian world, but I just think it planted a kernel of rage in my mind. I felt that the way the mom was treated was so unjust and that I really wanted her to have a second chance, but it felt like the standards were so impossible. And it felt like the system was so arbitrary and that the effort to err on the side of caution ended up harming so many families who maybe should have been given another chance. So that's where the inciting incident came from. And of course that story is like completely set in our world, and the tech elements are my own invention. But Frida's very bad day definitely emerged out of my very good writing day in early 2014.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, and I think that's what's so powerful about this book is it is only like any good dystopian or speculative book, it's not super far divorced from reality. The kinds of things that happen in the book and like you're talking about in that article, I mean, they are part of our world. I immediately, when I read the description of your book, thought of Kim Brooks's book, Small Animals.
Which is so brilliant.
Yes, it is. So Kim and I were classmates in our MFA program. And yeah, in Kim's story, something very similar to what happens in the School for Good Mothers. She leaves her toddler in a car, or not even toddler, 4-year-old, right, to run into the store. And she ends up sort of, somebody tattles. So even though we may not have the kind of surveillance state of the world of your book, we do have a lot of citizen informants these days, which is
So Kim's book came out, I think, after I was already writing for a couple of years. So I wish it had been there for me right at the beginning. But I read her articles on salon.com. And, when I was first working on the project, people suggested to me to have an inciting incident that's more like Kim's situation, where it's completely innocent, where it's just for 5 minutes. The kid is totally fine. And it's much more about the police overreach and the government overreach. And I actually decided to have Frida do something truly bad and truly problematic that really, I mean, I think we can all agree that you just don't do that. You don't leave your baby alone.
It's almost 2 hours, right? That she does.
Right. So I wanted to begin at a place of like actual bad judgment, and to have her reckon with her guilt and shame over the course of the book. Because it felt like if I had her just have her baby in the back seat, and then it's truly like an innocent person fighting against government oppression, that's a really different story.
I agree. Yeah, no, I think that was seems like a smart choice, because it makes her more complex. It makes the story more complex. She did something wrong, but then at the same time, you see the state overreach as, this one thing snowballs and, and leads her to this whole other world where she could lose custody of her child, forever. Although there are other characters in the book whose mistakes, seem less serious, and others whose are, obviously much more, but it's interesting that they all kind of get treated the same way.
Well, I wanted to take some examples from real life. Like there's definitely a few things that are inspired by the headlines, like moms who had their kids sit in the car while they did a job interview because they didn't have any childcare, or moms who got in trouble for the kids walking home alone or playing in the yard alone. So some of those smaller stories for the secondary characters were definitely inspired by stuff I saw in the news. And also once you go down the rabbit hole of reading about parents whose children have been removed, there are just such a wide range of stories, from much more clear cut cases of neglect and abuse to moments of bad judgment, or even in cases where or cases I would see in the news where if the mom was an upper middle class white woman, it probably wouldn't have happened to her.
Right. No, exactly. And that leads into a question I wanted to ask about, race and class are very much a part of the book, and, how they affect how different women are treated by the system, but also some of the expectations that other mothers have of them or other people. I thought, you have, with Frida as a Chinese American woman, and there are certain expectations right around that society maybe puts or projects on Asian American women about achievement or behavior or something. And you explore what those are, both how Frida perceives them and then how others treat her as a result of some of those expectations. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
I'm not sure if I'm going to answer this exactly, so I might answer this in a more circular way.
That's fine.
It was exciting for me to write an Asian American heroine who got to be a mess and who got to be truly messy on the page, not particularly noble in any way, definitely not a model minority, and who got to be selfish and desirous and confused and makes bad decisions.
Human in other ways.
Right. I wanted her to have the full range of possibilities open to her, including the possibility of making bad decisions. And I think that that's what makes her as a character more human. But in terms of centering a story about American society and an Asian American perspective, I think writing through Frida's eyes really was the ultimate outsider perspective to look at race and class in the school and in society, because she's always the only Asian, and so she's othered from the other women because she's a woman of color, but she's also she hardly has any like women of color allies at the school, because she's also upper middle class and like sort of regarded as being like in cahoots with the white women.
Yeah. No, I mean, she's very much betwixt and between, but you're right. I mean, it makes her an ideal narrator in some ways, because she has this vantage point where she can kind of see everyone around her. I mean, the way that race becomes an issue also with the way that the women are treated by the system, I thought was fascinating as well. And you alluded to that in what you were saying about the real life examples.
Well, in real life, and I just always say a disclaimer that I'm just a novelist. Like, I'm not a journalist or researcher or public policy person at all. So I don't have all the statistics at my fingertips. But in real life, it's the problem of the tragedy of having the government remove your children from your home disproportionately affects Black and brown women who are poor. So I think that that statement is not a particularly controversial one anymore, and it's certainly backed up by data. And the why of that is, I think, something that has been discussed. But once I started reading more about this issue, I guess I was surprised that we're not all up in arms that this is what happens, because it seems like the greatest tragedy to have your child taken out of your home and to be so powerless in that way. So I know that that I'm as a novelist, I don't have a better solution, but I guess I'm surprised that it so rarely makes front page news, the fact that children are being removed all the time.
Right. Yeah. And right. It's true. I mean, there should be much more outrage about it in all circumstances, and certainly, in the places where it's really a reflection of other inequities. Shifting gears a little bit, I'm going to talk about men, and there are some. I don't want to give away any spoilers. There are some bad fathers in the book, but they're treated quite differently. And there is a sense that really the onus is so much more on women to be good mothers. There's so much more moral judgment, it seems, wrapped up in that. And can you talk a little bit about how you explored that in the book?
Well, I had the dads also be in their own school and their own re-education program, but I envisioned that school as having much less shame and guilt. And a lot less erasing of personhood than the mom's school does. So they have a different mantra that's less shamey. And also they get more contact with their kids. There's not as many threats. There's not as much threat of expulsion. They're given a second chance much more readily. They're treated much more like human beings than the moms at the school, which I felt I wanted to gesture toward the way it goes in real life, where moms are just under a lot more pressure and judgment.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that the mantra for the mom school was, "I'm a bad mother, but I'm learning to be better." Right? Isn't that?
I am a bad mother, but I'm learning to be good.
Oh, I'm learning to be good. Right. Whereas the men's is about being a better man, which kind of just says it all right there.
Yeah, so that comes from my friend Keith Wilson, the award-winning poet who came up with the mantra, I am a bad father, but I'm learning to be a better man. Because he said it has to be something different. And
Right.
so all credit goes to Keith.
Yeah. It says a lot. So I wanted to talk about the character of Susanna. Susanna, tell us, because I loved reading about her. She's sort of like this, she's the girlfriend of Frida's ex-husband, and she's kind of like your nightmare perfect mother in many ways. Could you tell us a bit more about her?
Well, Susanna, I think was not so much plucked out of our culture when I started the book in 2014. Like now, I think it's very easy to say like, oh, look, there's like, here are 200 examples of women like Susanna all over Instagram. But I think wellness, like I had her start out as like a wellness guru, like perfect hippie goddess. But I think in that time of the many years of writing this book, wellness culture has now become such a thing that Susanna now represents this like dominant aesthetic. So she is Frida's ex-husband's younger girlfriend, who's about 9 or 10 years younger than Frida, who is a former dancer, tall and gorgeous, and manages to put on cat's eye eyeliner even if she's doing childcare all day, and never complains about anything, and only uses cloth diapers, and only uses organic food, and makes everything from scratch. She's basically like the hippie domestic goddess of one's nightmares. Like I imagined her as like, who might the nightmare other woman be? But I also wanted her to be really nice. Like part of how she oppresses Frida is just her do-gooder niceness.
Yeah, she wants to be her friend. She wants to, I mean, reading her, I was reminded of, so when my kids were born, I have twins, they were born in 2006, and it was really like the height, or it was like this renaissance of like, no, it wasn't renaissance, but there's a lot of mommy bloggers around. And I ended up being a mommy blogger myself.
Oh, really?
Yes. I blogged for this website called Babbel for a long time. And but
I'm gonna have to ask you about that afterwards. You can give me like inside intel.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it was like this just big thing in like the early mid 2010s or whatever. But I remember feeling like, and when I was pregnant, just there were so many, all of a sudden, all these models of motherhood were like in our face. And it was before Instagram and even before like Facebook really took off, but you started to see this performative parenting that wasn't really a thing before. It certainly wasn't like when our parents had us. And, you know, I couldn't help sort of being like, oh, wow, look at whatever mama over there is using cloth diapers and making her own baby food and like looking beautiful while she's doing it. And like, gosh, I guess if she can do it, I should be doing it too. You know, so like this all kind of like guilt starts factoring in. And it really does seem like the way parenthood is on display in a way that it didn't used to be.
I'm sure part of my book and like part of my critique of performative parenting is probably influenced by me spending too much time on Instagram. So, and then feeling bad about like spending so much time like feeding my brain all these things and then feeling bad about it for days.
So many of us do though, right? I mean, it's hard to escape.
And I think the thing that shifted once, I mean, I felt like when I first started using Instagram before having a child, I flipped through it like I was looking at a fashion magazine or something. But then once I saw all the mom stuff and baby stuff, I started feeling really bad and feeling really inadequate. Like I think there's a famous, I think she's a comic or an actress, and she'd had a whole Instagram account of just the bento boxes she made for her son with like like all homemade stuff with like homemade meatballs and then dessert and the perfect veggie. And I just felt so bad. Like I felt so like I must be so lazy. I mean, even with Valentine's Day, I got my daughter the last box of ready to go cards at Walgreens because that's all that was left. But I see all the crafts that people have made and I feel like, oh, next year I'll do better. But I mean, I did fine.
Of course. And it's that stuff that, does it really make you a better parent to do that? Right. And I think part of what what I really liked about your book is that it explored what does it really mean to be a good parent, right? What does it mean getting everything right all the time? Does it mean, cutting sandwiches into fancy shapes and making bento boxes or whatever? So, and you really can't, that idealized version of motherhood is really it leaves aside some of the really elemental stuff. You have some really powerful scenes that show the love between Frida and her daughter. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you developed that relationship in the book, because writing about children can be hard. Like, I know when I try to do it, it's not always easy to give a child, especially a young child, a personality and create that sense of love between mother and child. How did you work on that?
I think that's where the book got a lot richer after I started working on it again after having my daughter, because in the earlier drafts, I will say that Frida was quite a bit colder and angrier because I was coming from a place of just total fear. Like, what am I getting into having a baby?
Right.
And it's for me as a writer, it's much harder to write moments of joy and connection than to write moments of conflict. So the loving, tender moments definitely were fueled by real life. But I really appreciate you saying that this resonated with you, because I got to say, I also stole all the child dialogue from my daughter and her friends. So it was very helpful to be in the trenches of early parenthood while working on this book, because one of the things in the earlier drafts that I got so wrong was that I had the toddlers speaking in paragraphs. Like, I had Frida and Harriet having these really long conversations because I had no idea how much a 20-month-old child would talk.
Right.
But my daughter and her friends were definitely like awesome material. Like, just going to the playground was also book research.
I'm sure. Yeah. And it's hard to do it without it being saccharine. It's hard to get it right and have it like not come across as cutesy. But I think you walked that line really well, and it felt authentic, and it felt, I mean, it was really powerful. I mean, really, I definitely like found myself on the verge of tears at one point where she was trying to, could only talk to her daughter through a screen basically. And it was really well done. One thing Frida says a few times, she talks about in the book, the house of her mind or the house of her body. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that and how that imagery figures in.
So this is not the most erudite explanation, but I gotta say that all the rooms and houses talk really came from the fact that when I began this project, I was staying at a friend's house upstate and all by myself, snowed in for 2 weeks, and it was a glorious time. But at the time, I remember I think on like the HBO website, I was watching the behind the scenes videos of True Detective season 1. Like, I couldn't watch. I don't think streaming was a thing yet, and I couldn't watch the episodes, but I would just watch the making of. And there was so in the making of, the showrunner and writer had this whole metaphor about rooms, and so that's where that idea came from. It's sometimes it's just helpful to be immersed in other media while you're generating work of your own. But I liked the idea of the Russian nesting dolls. And I also liked the idea that what Gust was telling her was kind of nonsense in the way that of how he explains the world to her, and how he talks down to her generally is a lot of hot air usually.
Right.
Like, it's a beautiful image, but it's also part of Gust's like nonsense about how the world works.
Right. Yeah. He and Susanna are both sort of up on, Gust is the ex-husband. They're up on some sort of loftier plane that doesn't feel as genuine and doesn't feel as real. And, and the irony being they're the ones who don't, who are getting to not have to go to school to be re-educated. I want to just note to folks who are watching, please, if you have questions, throw them into the chat and we can give them to Jasmine to answer. I'm guessing there are questions out there about this book, and because there's just so much meaty stuff here. I'd be curious to know if anyone has read it yet. So what I thought was so interesting in your world building, right, of this world in which you have this state surveillance of mothers and fathers, I guess to some degree, was that, as best I could tell, was the only thing that was different, right? Like the rest of the world is very recognizable. At first I was like, oh, is this even supposed to be like the future, or is this just a sort of an alternate reality? But I wondered if, that was an intentional choice. Like, I'm not going to have all kinds of other things be different in the world, just this.
Well, I think part of it was decided by the form because the book was simply too long at one point, and I knew that if I went down the path of explaining all the laws that had changed, that's like 50 pages right there. And then
Right.
if I had drones everywhere, if I had robots everywhere, it just gets to be like 700 pages,
It's unwieldy.
which is not impossible, but I was hoping to have a sleek, swift book, which I was leaning much more toward much more bare bones world building. Like I wanted to give readers just enough to get a taste so that their imagination could fill in the rest. But I was also thinking of novels like Never Let Me Go, which has just one or two different elements rather than an entire other universe. So I also think that the world building actually got pared back like in 2016, like when the Trump administration came into power. Like suddenly the idea of a government institution that emerges out of nowhere and is really oppressive and is really badly run and creates havoc in everyone's lives then became plausible. Right. So I didn't necessarily need to say like, oh, this could happen, because it was just happening.
Right. Yeah. The badly run thing is interesting. I thought that added that touch of realism to the book. The fact that the school, like, things were not flawless. It was not like this finely oiled machine all the time. But I think that spoke well to also just the nature of bureaucracy being messed up a lot of times. Mistakes get made. Things, people lose their kids as a result. I mean, it's crazy. So we have a comment, but I think there might be spoilerish things in it. But I will tell you that she's saying she just finished the book. It was upsetting, heartbreaking, amazing, unique. She was curious about your thoughts on what happens after the story ends. But I feel like if we ask you to speak about that, then it will be a spoiler. But maybe I could ask this: do you, in your mind, and as a writer, I know it's always like hard to answer when people ask like, well, what happens after the story ends? But did you think about that in writing? Do you have sort of your long-term imagined vision of what happens to Frida down the road?
I do have a long-term vision. I will say, without giving the ending away, that I wanted to leave the ending open to several different interpretations. So I wanted to have a moment of beauty amidst the way things play out at the end. But I do think it can be read several different ways. And I always really like endings that offer possibilities rather than being definitive.
Right. But there probably won't be a sequel, right? Question: will there be a sequel to tell you definitively?
I wish I could say sure, but I mean, this book, I mean, I'm 43 now. I started the book when I was 35, and I think I've told the story that I want to tell. If there's more to tell, I will be happily surprised. I will say that the possibility of it existing in TV like opens up the possibility for a lot more stories. So that there might be another life for this story in a different medium.
Right. Yeah. I wanted to ask about that and say congratulations.
Thank you.
Is it definitely like it's actually going into development now, or is it?
I think the parts that have been announced is Jessica Chastain's company Freckle Films is the producer, with Endeavor Content as the studio, and the amazing director Jude Wang is attached to direct, and I'm signed on as an executive producer. But I think those are the pieces that I am allowed to talk about at present. But it's all very exciting. I mean, it was info that we've been sitting on for a long time, so it was very exciting to announce during Pub Week.
Yeah, that is so great. It seems like it would be such a fantastic series. I would love to see it come to life on the screen. So I will be first in line to check that out. And it must have been exciting for you just to see it all come into fruition. Do you have like your ideal cast in mind? Have you cast Frida?
Not necessarily. I will say that the part that I'm really excited about is just the idea of having a 1 hour drama with an Asian American lead, because that's still pretty rare.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to have Frida anchor a show is I think it would be a great part, and also great in terms of representation.
Yeah.
And also, it's the kind of part where I don't really feel like we've seen that many Asian American women on screen who get to do the things that Frida does and behave in these ways.
Right. To have all that complexity, not just be sort of, badass killing machine, for example.
Or just not be the girlfriend or the med student or the doctor in the background.
The doctor, I was going to say,
there's a lot of doctors in the background.
The doctor or the scientist, right. No, exactly. And what kind of responses have you gotten from readers? Have you gotten to, chat with or hear from folks, and how the book is landing with them?
I've got to say, thank you to the Bookstagram community. It's really been amazing. Also, there's like a significant amount of work put into creating all of that content to like get the word out about books. And certainly authors and publishers are benefiting a lot from all the hard work of the folks on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok. The idea of my book being on TikTok was like, oh my God, it's the future.
Yeah.
Like, thank you for this glimpse of the future and the youth of America.
Right.
But I've mostly exchanged messages on Instagram and occasionally on Twitter. But I did have 2 events in Philly and Harrisburg, and it was really exciting to meet readers. And I definitely squealed at them a lot and shrieked because I was so excited to meet people after being cooped up at home in January. It's so that was really exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. We do have one more question. And
sure.
This is it. Sorry. Okay, here we go. This is a great question, especially given the timing. Actually, were you influenced by the separation of immigrating mothers and their kids?
Are we talking about the separation at the border?
At the border, I assume, yeah.
So I was influenced in the sense that I had to think really hard about whether or not to acknowledge that in the book. But I ultimately decided not to write details about the Trump administration or the pandemic into the book, because it felt like it would be disrespectful to try to gesture toward that real life tragedy in just a sentence or 2.
Yeah.
So I decided not to talk about that. But that was going on when my daughter, like what was happening at the border, I think was in the summer of 2017, which was when my daughter was about 6 months old. And like when I was just getting back to writing, to working on the book at all. And I mean, what was so paralyzing about it was just, it's really impossible for any fiction to truly capture like how horrifying the world has become in the last few years. So like everything that's happened all at the same time, if you tried to put it all in one book, someone would say like, that's not plausible.
Right. No, but you can only do so much. And you also, I think your book, it resonates. I mean, obviously by by Ellen's question just now, it shows that it does have resonance with real life events. I mean, beyond just the obvious of neglectful moms. But because you isolate it in sort of its own speculative world, and you really shine the spotlight just on that, it allows it to be more of I don't want to say like an allegory or a fable so much, but it isolates sort of like the moral questions of it. And then you can, think about that as it applies. Readers can think about it as it applies to other situations.
Yeah, I definitely was thinking about that issue a lot, and completely heartbroken and horrified, as we all were. But I think I just never imagined. I mean, I know that the American government has had so many examples of cruelty over time, but I think I didn't think in my adult life that the horrors of the past would be reenacted in this way.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a situation where I don't even know. I'm sure things are better, but they're probably not as good as they could be. So it's one of those things we all have to, keep our eye on the ball on. All right. I hate to end on a somber note. So let me ask a hopefully more upbeat question. Are you working on anything else? I know you're going to be very busy with the TV, and you're still in the thick of promoting this book, but do you have another book that's baking in the back of your mind?
I wish I could tell you yes. I'm definitely in the thick of things with promoting, and we're about to launch the book in the UK in 2 weeks
Oh,
from
yeah.
today. And so I'm in talking mode right
Yeah,
now,
right,
but
right.
I'm reading a lot and trying to see my daughter when I'm not reading and promoting, and trying to refill the well. And
Yeah.
I'm told that one has ideas for a second book and that it does happen. So I'm just trying to stay hopeful about that. So I haven't started scribbling ideas yet, but I trust that I'll get back to it. I'm excited to start writing again.
Great. All right. Well, we will all hope that you do. Um, to folks who've not gotten their hands on a copy of the book yet, you can get it, a signed copy, at the book table, which is, oh shoot, where is that again?
It's in Oak Park,
Oh, it's in
Illinois.
Oak Park.
So
Okay, right.
there's
So
there's several indie bookstores in Chicago that have signed copies, but I know that the book table has a whole lot.
awesome. Good to know. Excellent. So we threw the link up there, and we hope everyone will get themselves a copy. It really is. I mean, it's riveting. It's heartbreaking. It's so smart, and just congratulations to you. And we really appreciate you coming on the Zeitgeist today. Best of luck with all future endeavors.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for